Don't make me call you by name. I saw it. All right. Christopher, get your drink and sit down. All right, let's go. Everybody sit down so we can get going. The quicker you sit down, the quicker we can get to the reception. All right. Before we enter into our 3 keynotes, we've talked about the impact of sponsors. We had a record number of sponsors for this event, and we want to thank them. We had a gold level sponsorship, silver level, bronze level, and contributing sponsors. And everybody has just been wonderful to work with. Some of these have their booths there, so please make sure that you go by and pick up some of the things that they have to share. There's some really great things. I'm hoping you leave some behind so I can take them with me. But what I want to do is I want to invite up Christopher Sullivan from the Heritage Foundation, Senior Student Program Manager for the Heritage Foundation. And I want him to be able to share a little bit about the initiatives that they have as a wonderful sponsor of the Newman Guide Leaders Summit. Christopher?
Well, thank you guys for having us. It's an honor for us to be here tonight. The Newman Guide is such a great resource for students and for families that are looking for schools that are faithfully Catholic. It helped me actually choose the Catholic University of America, and that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. So I appreciate all the great work that you guys are doing, and it's great to be back here on campus at Catholic tonight. I know I can speak for the Heritage Foundation when I say that we appreciate the work that you're doing to form young men and women of character and virtue. I've always been struck in particular by Catholic University's mission statement, which is that the university seeks to discover and impart the truth, all in service to the church, the nation, and the world. And I'm particularly interested in what all of your students have to offer to the nation. We know that from America's founding to the present, Catholics have shaped the United States. They've played an important role, and we need the service of faithful Catholics today, who value tradition, who believe in a transcendent moral order, and who are ready to be warriors for truth in a hostile world. America's future will depend on well-formed young people, and the students that emerge from each of your schools are well-equipped for the fight for the permanent things, for faith, for family, and for the preservation of liberty. We've had hundreds of impressive students that have emerged from your schools, that have joined our programs, and we want to continue to bring the very best students to Washington, and so we need your help. We want to invest in your students, and we want to prepare them to be leaders in public policy. Every day we're working to equip those young conservatives with the tools they need to lead. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about a few of our programs and opportunities for your students to get involved and make a difference in policy. We recently launched our high school fellowship, and I know there's K through 12 leaders here as well, where we bring 35 high school students from across the country to Washington, D.C. for a week packed with policy lectures, mentorship, and field trips to Mount Vernon, to the halls of Congress. It's a great opportunity for high school students to take that first step and to make their mark in policy. And we're also reaching beyond Washington, D.C. with our online fellowship program, the Heritage Academy. It features lectures on America's founding, conservatism, and policy, and students can join this program from anywhere in the country. So it's a great first step. And our flagship program is the Young Leaders Program, our internship program here in Washington. And we welcome conservative students to join our team. We fortify them with an education in American First Principles, policy, lectures, and mentorship. And once we've trained students, we continue to invest in them afterwards through our job bank and our alumni services. We work with them to help them find work where they can make a difference and where they can execute on policy. We know there's no shortage of problems to solve and challenges to overcome, so we need talented, faithful Catholics to lead in the conservative movement. and we need your help to reach them. So if you know any conservatives who are ready to fight for America's future, please do invite them to join our programs. Each of you has some flyers in front of you for each of our programs, and you can visit our websites on there to learn more. But I'll also be over at Heritage's table, which is over there to the left-hand side, and happy to connect with any of you if we can connect your students with opportunities. But with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move to our first keynote for the evening. Dr. Kilpatrick was on my podcast for the Cardinal Newman Society, and I just so enjoyed the conversation with him, his warmth and ability to attract people. He's going on his fourth year as the president here, and in a couple of fifth year as the president of Catholic University of America. So to give you a little background on Dr. Kilpatrick, he's the 16th president of Catholic University of America. Before assuming this role, he served as the provost of Illinois Institute of Technology. He's also was a dean of engineering at the University of Notre Dame and a longtime faculty for North Carolina State University. A convert to Catholicism, something that came up in our conversations. And Kilpatrick frequently lectures on the integration of faith and reason, including the meaning and purpose of a Catholic university, and also beauty in science. She's well equipped to talk about, and Catholic social teaching and innovation. So if you would, welcome Dr. Peter Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for that warm welcome. And if you'll allow me to open my talk with a short prayer, I'd like to read one of my favorite prayers by St. John Henry Newman. For those of you that haven't heard it before, it's called Some Definite Service, and I was introduced to this prayer by a recently retired faculty member of ours, David Walsh, at his retirement party. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me, which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall strive to be a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments. Therefore I will trust him. Wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. If I am in perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. I'm so delighted to give a talk in honor of St. John Henry Newman at this Cardinal Newman Summit for Catholic schools and universities. As an educator and administrator dedicated to the mission and committed to the success of Catholic education, it's a privilege really to talk to you about Catholic education, something that's really near and dear to my heart. And as you all know, it was really the Catholic Church and Catholic educators who gave us education as they took Greek philosophy, ethics, and thought, and they combined it with the order of Roman law, and then they created the cathedral schools and ultimately the universities that have become the gold standard for all of education. So to understand that a little bit, we know that the Romans and the Greeks gave us what's called the liberal arts. And much has been written about a classical education, but the foundation stones are always these two elements that they called the trivium and the quadrivium. And really what they were intended to do was to give you a complete education in everything that you needed to know to be a civilized or an educated person. There were the verbal arts, there were the quadrivium was considered to be the application of number and math to everything that was known at the time, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And then the servile arts were intended to be to help you learn the profession. But the core of it was the trivium. And the trivium was really to educate you to be able to think clearly and rigorously. And all of this was really rooted in the truth of the human person. As both Pope St. John Paul II and his successor, Pope Benedict XVI, have written, today we have a crisis of values in Western culture, often exalted by the media, of subjectivism, moral relativism, and nihilism, quote. So to refine the center, the focus, the topic of my talk, the foundation stones of an authentically Catholic education, we must recall the prophetic words of Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes number 22, in which we read, Christ, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, fully reveals humankind to him or herself and makes his supreme calling clear. Elsewhere, John Paul writes, man can't know him, people can't know themselves apart from Jesus Christ. And of course, this all stands to reason, because everything was created by Christ. Everything was made by Jesus, as the prologue to John's Gospel tells us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and through him everything was made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And so if the study of a university is everything that's natural and supernatural and created by human persons, it just stands to reason that, as St. Patrick says, Jesus has to be before us, behind us, ahead of us, has to be right at the center. So I would maintain that Jesus, the Word, the Logos, is the form of all education. Form in the sense of its reason for being, what constitutes it. As Pope St. John Paul wrote in Ex Corde Ecclesiae, mentioned in our Mass this afternoon, the privileged task of a Catholic university, and I would say of a Catholic school, is to unite existentially by intellectual effort two orders of reality that too frequently tend to be placed in opposition to each other, as if they were antithetical. One is the rigorous search for truth, and the other is the certainty of already knowing that we possess the fount of truth. So to hold those two things together, that's the privileged task of a Catholic school and a Catholic education. And I would argue that this really should hold for all Catholic schools. And so my principal point would be that the Word is the form of all education. Now, if you want to understand the particular forms that we study in schools and universities, namely the hard sciences, the sacred sciences, the human sciences, the arts, the social sciences, the humanities, then you need to understand well the underlying principal form and how that informs the particular forms. And sadly, the last 50 years has been something of a desert in our American Catholic Church's ability to catechize well the faithful. I'm a convert. I converted in 1981. And, I went through the RCIA and had a wonderful priest who helped bring me along, and pretty much what I knew at the end of my conversion in the RCIA was I knew the creed. And, I had tested the creed and my belief in the creed, but then I was asked to teach RCIA. And I told my director of religious education, I don't know anything about the faith. I know the creed. He said, well, it's easy. You just get this book called Catholicism by Richard McBrien, and you read it, and you can teach RCIA. So I started doing that, and these sponsors, these 50, 60-year-old women and men would come up to me and say, Peter, that's not what I learned in the Baltimore Catechism. And I said, what's the Baltimore Catechism? And then they would share with me books that I should read. So I started going to priests and asking them, the DRE gave me this book, Catholicism. How do I learn the faith? And he said, well, you should learn about this thing called the Nihil Obstat and the imprimi potest, and, you learn about, what gets approved as legitimate Catholic teaching. And that sort of set me on a 45-year period of learning the faith, but really on my own. And I'm blessed that it didn't screw me up too bad. So in order to catechize well, we need to help our students recover something much more fundamental, namely a transcendent and supernatural worldview informed by word and sacrament that enables them to really receive this deposit of faith that I was fortunate enough to be led to. Catholic education, in other words, to be truly Catholic, best prepares students to know themselves, to become fully alive, and to understand the world that they live in with a transcendent perspective. So what's it going to take for us to do that in all of our schools and universities? I would argue there's 3 fundamental building blocks. And we heard all of them really today at Mass, at homily, and I heard it in our discussions in the other room. The first essential building block is humility, the queen of all human virtues and the foundation for an authentic Catholic education that prepares us to receive the form. And I would argue that to understand who you are, to locate your place in the world, your vocation, your mission, your purpose, demands of you a deep and a real humility. And this is true for everyone. It's true for leaders, educators, students, parents of students. And why is that? Because pride is that primordial sin that is the root of all sin, and it blinds us to learning. As the Catechism tells us, pride is an undue self-esteem and an inordinate desire for one's own excellence that rejects subjection to God. And by exalting our own judgment over God's revelation, the intellect cuts itself off from the ultimate source of all truth. So you really can't learn if you're proud. One of my favorite passages in the Passion of the Christ is the scene where Jesus is carrying his cross up to Calvary, and he falls for the first time, and the Blessed Virgin Mary runs around to him and looks up at her with a blood-drenched face, and he says to her, "See, Mother, I make all things new." This is actually an adaptation of Revelations 21, where Jesus on the throne in heaven says, "Behold, I make all things new." And it captures for me in Scripture the quintessential condition for learning, namely being open and humble enough to always be able to learn new things. Things about myself, things about my relationships, things about education, things about what's best for our students in 2026, and about the changing nature of schools and universities and our culture. Namely, the new things that Jesus will help us create in the future so that our schools are vibrant and nourishing and empowering our students with a supernatural worldview and a deep and abiding faith. Our newly proclaimed doctor of the church, St. John Henry Newman, knew well and wrote well of the virtue of true Christian humility. In Discourse 8 of the Ideas of the University, the idea of a university, Newman explains that the philosophy of ethics mistakenly associates humility with modesty and self-respect. But true Christian humility, Newman affirms, is nothing more or less than understanding and recognizing our total dependence on God for everything that we do, everything that we are. In the beautiful prayer of St. Therese of Lisieux, she says, "Oh my God, make me to see things as they really are, that I may not be deceived by any illusion." That's our prayer for our students, our faculty, and our entire community. True education helps us to shatter the illusion that we're something any other than a fallen creature of a loving God. As St. Irenaeus said centuries ago, God did not tell us to follow him because he needed our help, but because he knew that by loving him and relying on him, that would make us whole. So how do we know as leaders and educators if we're cultivating this virtue properly? And by the way, that's not always a given at a university. Dr. Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote in his classic Transformation in Christ that humility has a number of characteristic telltale signs. Perhaps most importantly, humility rejoices in our creatureliness, and it delights in God's glory. I would argue the easiest way to tell if you're humble is if you're always grateful and joyful for everything that you have, because you know it's a gift. The second fundamental building block of an authentically Catholic education is what I would characterize as a participation in that fundamental form of the Logos, what I like to call sacred time. If we're really humble and grateful for everything that God has given us, don't we want to thank Him all the time? And the premier way that we thank Him is what we did earlier this afternoon, by going to Mass and celebrating the Eucharist, which means Thanksgiving. And to enter into Mass, of course, is to enter into the Paschal Mystery. It's a signal grace to receive the Eucharist at Mass. Vatican II in Lumen Gentium characterizes it, of course, as the source and summit of the Christian life. And St. John Vianney, the patron saint of parish priests, said, all the good works in the world are not equal to the holy sacrifice of the Mass, because they are the works of men, but the Mass is the work of God. Martyrdom is nothing in comparison, for it is but the sacrifice of man to God, but the Mass is the sacrifice of God for man. So to enter fully into the Mass, to receive the Eucharist in a state of grace, and with the full cooperation of our hearts and our minds, does untold good for us. And I would argue it's what builds unity in our communities. It brings the uni into university. It's impossible to be a Catholic university if we're not constantly celebrating communally the Mass together. So how important is this for our students? Well, I would assert that it's essential and critical. The teachers and administrators of a truly Catholic school should all be formed in our faith and eager to receive Christ in the Eucharist. It's where we get grace. It's, we're just nature. But if we have that grace, grace perfects our nature. And so I would argue we should build a rhythm of the school year around key celebrations of the Mass, just like we did earlier today. It's simply the most important and valuable thing we could ever do to build unity and commitment to mission. The last essential building block is a concept that was developed by St. Thomas Aquinas and medieval philosophers called intellectus. And I know many of you may not have heard about that word, but St. Thomas intended for intellectus to be contrasted with ratio, and to distinguish this mode of human intellection as direct, intuitive comprehension of first principles, as compared to ratio, which is discursive and is step-by-step reasoning. And what's happened in most of our schools and universities is we've relied almost exclusively on ratio, certainly for the last 100, 150 years. Intellectus is the key to the sacramental imagination, or what Stratford Caldecott has called the re-enchantment of education. It recognizes well not only our faith and reason completely interconnected, but everything, natural and supernatural, is completely connected. Indeed, it is in the very nature of God that He is not a single person, but a remarkable communion of three persons, so deeply interrelated that God is three persons but one God. So you couldn't have a better example other than in God of this concept of intellectus. Intellectus is that capacity for human intellection that recognizes that all things are connected and ultimately relate to God, who is in His very being one. Another way to characterize intellectus is holistic thinking or holistic contemplation, or what Joseph Pieper means by leisure in his famous essay on the basis of culture. It is the goal of enchantment, truth, beauty, goodness, and inculcating the sacramental imagination to build this mode of intellection that we call intellectus. Understanding that the natural world only exists because it is undergirded by spirit and by supernatural realities is critical to the cultivation of intellectus. Again, St. John Henry Newman understood this well. He described the secularism and rationalism of the Enlightenment as stripping the universe of its spiritual meaning, and he called that disenchantment. It's stunning to me that some of the most delicate and nuanced scientific findings of our day are proving out the remarkable wholeness of the universe. For example, the phenomenon called quantum entanglement, which was originally described in 1935 by Einstein and Schrödinger, describes the strange connectedness of subatomic particles that can be separated by billions of light years. So how does this remarkable connectedness influence our views on our lives and our education? For one, I think it should cause us to reflect with awe and wonder on the power and glory of God. The English poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." And our task as educators is to help students understand that every time they encounter beauty, truth, goodness, wonder, awe, that they're encountering the intricate handiwork of God Himself. So I'd like to conclude my remarks by cataloging just a few specific ways that you in your schools can inculcate this intellectual virtue of intellectus. As a scientist and an engineer, as mentioned, I'm a chemist and a chemical engineer. I've always been fascinated by the peculiarity of our universe. Many physicists have written about this, some invoking design, but many others devising the infinite multiverse. For those of you who may not be familiar with the arguments, I commend the new translation into English of the book, God, the Science, the Evidence, by two French engineers, Michel-Yves Bolloré and Olivier Bonassis. One element of this peculiarity is what has been called the anthropic coincidences, and I suppose many of you might be familiar with that idea. It's a recognition made some 50 years ago that the fundamental constants of the universe, like the gravitational constant, the strong nuclear force constant, or the value of the cosmological constant, appear to be so finely tuned for life on planet Earth that it can't be an accident. And one of my favorite aspects of the peculiarity of the universe is how low the entropy of the universe appears to be. Not to get too technical on you, but the entropy is simply a measure of how disordered or random the universe is. So Roger Penrose, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, wrote in 1989 that the odds of the universe beginning in its highly ordered state at the beginning were 1 in what's called the Penrose number, 10 raised to the 10th power raised to the 123rd power. These are not really numbers that our human minds can comprehend. This is stunning. The universe is unimaginably two-dimensional. So how can this be? It's hard to imagine that it can be that way without it being intended. Second way, as a lover of great art, another way to inculcate the virtue of intellectus in your students is to help them understand how every great story, whether it's a book or a play or a song, is really either an imitation of the great story, or it's the story, namely the story of Christ's immense love for us to give Himself up sacrificially, or it's a rejection of that story. And two wonderful books that I can recommend, I mentioned them in the networking session we had. Bishop Robert Barron wrote a book called Seeds of the Word, Finding God in the Culture. And it's got about 100 little short essays in it on how you see the great story in books or movies or other ways that they're portrayed. The other is a wonderful treatise on the philosophy of art by Daniel McInerney entitled Beauty and Imitation. And what McInerney does in that book is he helps us understand what von Balthasar calls the theodrama as contrasted to the ego drama. And it's a wonderful way to look at all human created works, books, plays, poems, songs, statues, paintings. It's really a lovely book. And I think it opens up this sacramental imagination for us. And finally, a third way to cultivate intellectus that I'm sure you all know is simply through beauty, not only in human works, but in nature and in the magnificent and elegant mathematics that seem to underlie virtually all of nature. In fact, my oldest son is a mathematician, and I often ask him, how can it be that mathematics isn't a creation rather than a discovery or an invention? And he and I've had some interesting conversations about that. Einstein, Murray Gell-Mann, most of the famous physicists of the 20th century would tell you that the way they made their discovery was by studying and discovering the simplicity and the elegance of the math that undergirded the physics. So in conclusion, as educators and as leaders, and many of you who are parents, you understand the value of an education that forms the whole person. A truly Catholic school or a truly Catholic university will continue to deepen the formation of your students as they move forward into adulthood. And it will form them in a way where they will automatically have this sacramental imagination. They'll have this understanding, this mode of intellection called intellectus. The holistic education must be built on the foundational virtue of humility, or you can't open your mind to learn. It's so easy for us to allow pride to shut our minds down and prevent us from learning something that we really should be learning. I'm learning new stuff right now, almost every day. And it must be nurtured by the immense graces if your students are to truly become who God has called them to be. That is, holy and living sacrifices for the world. And finally, that chief intellectual virtue to spur them on to pursuing humility and grace is that total enchantment of education. This is the distinctive value of an authentic Catholic higher education and K through 12 education. It prepares young men and women to not simply succeed, but to serve and to flourish. To be, as Pope Leo XIII charged, and as I think Kevin chaired our university 139 years ago, the place that gives to the nation, the church, and the world her best citizens. To sanctify the temporal order through excellence in their chosen fields while remaining firmly grounded in the eternal truths. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Kelsey Reinhart. She is the president and CEO of CatholicVote. After a decade of discernment with the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia, Kelsey held senior roles at EWTN News and served as the interim executive director of Catholic News Agency. She joined CatholicVote as head of media and evangelization in 2024 and then was appointed the president and CEO in 2025. Bringing with her the background of integrating deep theological insight, global advocacy, and mission-driven media leadership. She also chairs the board of Fierce Athlete. I would ask you to go look that up, all initial caps, Fierce Athlete, created to empower female athletes to thrive in their God-given identity and femininity. And just a few months ago, welcomed a baby boy back in the back, our biggest star for today. So if you would welcome Kelsey.
it's a delight to be with you all here today. So many friendly faces in the room. I see the Dominican sisters, who were my family for so long, John Sherman, who I worked with, President Menace and others, and of course, the little guy in the back. So if he makes noises while his mom is speaking, you'll have to forgive him. He's just taking in all the conference. So, all right, well, I would love to just begin with what CatholicVote was involved in a couple of weeks ago, the Washington Nationals dispute. So if you were here in the city, you understood that there was a disturbing display of contempt towards Catholics and faithful Christians in the recordings released about Trevor Williams. And we demanded accountability, and the Nationals ultimately did the right thing. That was a victory worth noting and worth savoring for exactly 1 minute. And I say that because CatholicVote's battle in the political sphere parallels the battle that you are facing in higher education. What we're seeing in terms of the anti-Catholic bias in society exists in many places. And today, we learned that it was not simply about one man in the front office of the Washington Nationals. We warned that the bigotry behind this episode was not an anomaly. He was described in one memorable phrase as every other community relations director in sports. Major League Baseball is no longer merely dealing with one rogue staffer at one franchise. Today, they warned 3 Christian players that they would be fined $10,000 for their stance against Pride Night. The league is now the face of anti-Christian bias. I would go further. The anonymous staffer at the Major League Baseball that made that decision is every other decision maker across government, entertainment, media, and the arts. And when we look at just how far removed these individuals are from the belief and convictions of ordinary Americans, from the people who fill the pews, coach the little leagues, and pay the taxes, one question presses itself upon us with an uncomfortable force. Where do these people come from? We know the answer. They're being produced deliberately, systematically, in an uninterrupted stream by the institutions of higher education that have come to dominate the commanding heights of our culture. Now, that observation is not a counsel of despair, especially for this room, fighting against it. But to respond to it wisely, we have to reckon honestly with where we are, and perhaps more importantly, how we got there. America's great universities were not always engines of post-Christian formation. They were at their founding something closer to the opposite. The oldest and most prestigious universities in this country arose from a culture that regarded education and moral formation as inseparable, indeed, as aspects of a single task. Harvard, whose earliest motto was Veritas Christo et Ecclesia, for Christ and his church, stands as the most obvious example. Yale, Princeton, Brown, and all the other original Ivy League institutions were founded, at least in significant part, to train clergy and form Christian leaders. Duke, though not Ivy League, grew from a distinctly Christian educational mission. The assumption embedded in their founding was not merely that religious formation was compatible with rigorous education. It was that education was incomplete and ultimately incoherent without it. Think back. The Jesuits in the founding of America were relentless. Georgetown in 1789, Loyola Maryland in 1852, Loyola Chicago in 1870, Loyola New Orleans in 1912. 27 institutions of higher learning in the United States alone. A network that was built not from government mandate or philanthropic fashion, but by the conviction that forming the whole person toward truth and virtue were among the most important things that a civilization could undertake. The question before us tonight is, what cause do those institutions serve today? You are a deeply educated audience. I will not insult your intelligence with a lecture on the trajectory of Catholic higher education. You know the story. You know the Land O'Lakes Statement of 1967 and my alma mater, Notre Dame's involvement in it, which drove a wedge between Catholic universities and their ecclesial identity in the name of academic freedom. And you have watched those consequences unfold in the decades that followed. The present condition of Catholic higher education, with a growing number of honorable exceptions in this room, is not an accident. It is the logical outcome of choices made and choices deliberately kept. And here's what I want to offer as a genuinely hopeful observation, not in spite of a crisis, but because of it. The crisis is breaking open, and it is breaking open because of artificial intelligence. If we are alert and courageous, we are uniquely positioned to seize an answer. And what do I mean when I say that the arrival of artificial intelligence is breaking open this crisis? Marta Shehu, Vice President and Chief AI Officer at George Mason University, recently put the matter with unusual candor. Quote, "The reckoning has arrived at the public university now. The students who arrived in good faith for a credential the institution sold them are owed an answer, and the answer cannot be that the institution is studying the question. The institution has to choose in public what it is for. The hedging is over. Said more plainly, the jig is up. What comes next is a redesign or a slow surrender, and the slow surrender will be paid for by the students who can least afford it," end quote. The jig is up. That is exactly right. But I want to be precise about what kind of reckoning this is. If universities respond to AI merely by shifting from job training to resilience training, they will have missed the deepest point. Because the crisis is not economic. The crisis, as elucidated by Pope Leo XIV, is anthropological. The question is not simply what will students need to know in an age of intelligent machines. The deeper question, as I can attest after 9 years of teaching at Catholic schools, is this: what kind of human beings must we form in an age when machines can imitate intelligence, produce language, simulate creativity, and displace entire categories of work? To answer that question honestly, you must begin somewhere. You must have a prior commitment, a settled account of what a human being is, what he is for, and what it means for him to flourish. And precisely on that prior commitment, the secular university, as well as public schools have, by deliberate design and self-construction, declared themselves neutral. But we know that there is no such thing as neutral. Neutrality on the nature of the human person is itself a position. And it is a position that Catholic education, at its best, has never accepted and never can accept. And this is precisely why Catholic education is ready for this Catholic moment. If you'll indulge me for a moment off script, the president of Catholic University just spoke about Gaudium et Spes 22. It is Jesus Christ who fully reveals man to himself. In an age where the questions of man are pressing in upon what it means for every student to experience education, this room, these universities are going to be the ones who have the answers. And this is precisely why Cardinal Newman Society is doing only what I could describe as Herculean work. It was founded in 1993 to promote and defend Catholic education, and the schools in this room are genuinely living up to the name. That mission is one of the most consequential undertakings in America today, and its importance in the age of AI is only growing. In the midst of an accelerating collapse of formal education, and I mean public schools, but also nominally Catholic schools and universities, the Cardinal Newman Society is insisting on something that most of these institutions have forgotten or are too embarrassed to say aloud. Education is not the transfer of information or the acquisition of credentials or the cultivation of adaptable skills, which is how higher education gets sold to so many. If those things were all that education was, artificial intelligence will deliver them faster, more efficiently, and at a fraction of the cost. The question of what education is for has been forced upon us, whether we are ready to answer it or not. Education is the formation of the whole person towards truth, virtue, and although he mentioned humility, I would say especially prudence, the charioteer of the virtues, solidarity, wisdom, and rightly ordered freedom. And I might add, to form saints. We just had our big America 250 event in La Crosse, Wisconsin with the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe last week. And I had a very, America 250 speech all ready to go. I was just mulling over the opening. And it just wasn't hitting right. I went to adoration, confession, fell asleep that night, and I wake up in dreamland. And who is there? I kid you not. I am no mystic, but John Paul II. And I seize the opportunity and I say, Pope John Paul II, I need help with my mission and with my talk. And he looks at me in that John Paul II way and he says, what is your mission? You know how you say things in dreamland that you don't know where it comes from, it just, the answer is kind of given to you. And I say immediately without flinching, to be a saint. And he smiles, and then he turned into John Paul I. So, definitely a dream. I am no mystic. I don't know what I ate. But I think that John Paul II is absolutely right. The call to be saints, what is Catholic education for? When you talk to students, when you bring this up, they think that saints are stained glass windows. They think that saints are predestined beings. They think that saints are, lack the beating heart of humanity, almost like when little James was born, the doctor's there and it's like, he's like, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a saint. Congratulations. And it comes with a little holy habit. The students think this way, right? And I think in this room, we are familiar with the myth of inevitable progress. I think Catholics oftentimes have in their mind the myth of inevitable decline. Something has gone wrong in society and we can't fix it. If you look at America across 250 years, if you look at every saint that has come from Catherine Drexel, starting the order for Native Americans and blacks, if you look at Damien Molokai addressing what's happening in the Liberal colonies, if you look at Mother Frances Cabrini helping the orphans, if you look at Father Augustus Tolton starting a ministry of reconciliation, if you look at Father Francis Selos serving the immigrants in Louisiana, if you look at all the Jesuits, Isaac Jogues and Father Joliet riding down the Mississippi, what did they do? What did they do as American saints? They were so conformed to Christ that they stopped the inevitable decline. Despair has no calculus for change. Grace does. Anything at any moment can become better if it's conformed to Jesus Christ and his cross. This is the call of Catholic higher education in this moment. What will happen to the rest of education with AI? I saw it in the Catholic schools. Already, when Turnitin.com had to be used in the classrooms because of plagiarism, we knew that technology was forcing a question upon us. And guess what happened? It became so easy to cheat. You could find every answer to every textbook on Google. One person in the class, all they had to do was take a picture of the answers in the back of that textbook that they found online, text it to every member of the class, and the assignment is done. in the age of AI, I am telling you, education will collapse. The crisis is upon us, and it can only be answered by a school and a system that has an anthropological answer. We form people. We put them in a room. We discuss together. We journey toward truth. We make it exciting to love learning. The goal of a Catholic education, to form those saints, to be the saints for the next 250 years. Now I'll say this, just returning to my script because I went a little off there. It's often said that Catholics are so far behind the times that they're actually ahead. I think the best of our schools have returned to an education that an 80-year-old would remember from Catholic grammar school. Penmanship, use of memory, articulated speech, critical and creative thinking, Socratic discussion, passion for truth. And let's not forget manners and elegant dressing as the sort of Jane Austen entree into character. They are being nurtured by a passion for civics and genuine patriotism. These schools are positioned to flourish in the era of artificial intelligence precisely because they are offering what no machine can replicate: the formation of human beings who know who they are and why they are here. This matters not only for Catholic education, it matters enormously for the next 250 years of America. The American experiment is unique in the history of nations because it depends not merely on wise words inscribed in founding documents, but on the moral and religious character of citizens entrusted with reading, interpreting, and applying them. As George Washington well knew when he counseled after leaving office, religion and morality were the two indispensable supports of our republic. Or as John Adams would say, writing to the Massachusetts militia in 1798, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Even Thomas Jefferson, who systematically removed entire portions of the Bible, was unwilling to leave that sacred text behind. The Constitution, however brilliant, cannot save a people determined to corrupt it. Laws cannot preserve liberty when citizens no longer possess the virtues that self-government requires. The founders understood this. They said so repeatedly and with great clarity. We have spent the better part of 2.5 centuries finding out what happens when we forget it. Brian Birch, the ambassador to the Vatican now, previous predecessor at CatholicVote, speaking recently to the graduating class at Thomas Aquinas College, made this point with great precision. He said, "The deepest divide in our country is not Republican versus Democrat, red state versus blue state, or left versus right. The deepest divide is between those who believe in God and his power and those who deny him, or increasingly, those who resent him. A society that loses God does not become neutral. It becomes vulnerable to idols, and the worst of them. There is a phrase widely attributed to Chesterton, and while the precise wording may not appear in published works, it faithfully captures his settled conviction. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything." In his 1924 Father Brown story titled The Miracle of Moon Crescent, Chesterton describes a group of modern skeptics, rationalists, and materialists who are shaken by a crime that seems to involve black magic of some sort of preternatural force. Father Brown, however, cuts through the hysteria and shows that the apparent miracle has an ordinary human explanation. The Chestertonian point is extremely valid and very much in sync with the Cardinal Newman Society's perspective. People who loudly reject religion are not rational. They may actually become vulnerable to superstition, panic, fashionable nonsense, or occult explanations because they have lost a stable framework for reality. On the other hand, Father Brown's Catholicism is the source of his mental clarity and the spiritual freedom that makes possible a genuinely rational approach. The people being shaped in our elite institutions today are not being formed toward greater freedom or deeper rationality. They are being formed toward ideological rigidity and moral confusion. And so we come to the Catholic moment. That phrase was coined by the late Father Richard John Newhouse, one of the earliest advocates of this group, who argued that now is the time for faithful Catholics to bring their full intellectual, moral, and cultural inheritance to bear on America's future. Not as a bid for dominance, not as a sectarian retreat into a protected enclave while the culture burns, tempting though it is, but as an offering, a vision of the human person that this country desperately needs and that we are uniquely positioned to provide. There's a reason that the hottest club in New York is the Catholic Church for Gen Z. The Catholic Moment for America is offering this vision, the human person created by God, wounded by sin, redeemed by Christ, called to virtue, ordered to communion, and destined for eternal life. This is the truth about man upon which the entire edifice of the Western civilization was built. Dear friends, you understand something that many others have missed. That one of the most urgent civic acts that we can perform is to restore education to its proper purpose. If we want to heal the fractures tearing at our common life, if we want to rebuild a culture capable of sustaining free and virtuous self-government, we must recover the fullness of the Catholic intellectual tradition. That is why your presence here matters, and why your decision to recover what education is for is more urgent than any moment in recent memory. The task before you is not to preserve Catholic schools and colleges as safe enclaves in a hostile culture. The genuinely historic task is to form men and women who can walk back into the commanding heights of our society, into positions at the Washington Nationals and the MLB, leading corporations and centers of knowledge, not merely as culture warriors in the reactive sense, but as saints, as bearers of truth, conformed to Christ, people who know what a human being is, what education is for, and what a civilization worth inhabiting actually looks like. That is what the Catholic Moment means as we celebrate America 250, looking ahead to the next 250 years. That is the challenge God in history has placed before you and before us. Go forward bravely.
Okay, after this final keynote, we will go over for our Star-Spangled Celebration for the night, reception and dinner. Our final speaker is Patrick Riley. If you think about this event wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Patrick Riley. If it wasn't for what he experienced in his college that provoked him to seek something better. He started the Cardinal Newman Society in 1993 with the mission, as we've talked about, to promote and defend faithful Catholic education. I started a podcast with Father Pavanka from Franciscan University of Steubenville, and I mentioned that, and he stopped me right at the beginning and said, think about that. How powerful a statement is that? To promote and defend faithful Catholic education, and that is what Patrick Riley has created now, going on for 33 years, the reason we're all in this room. Patrick has been on numerous television programs, EWTN, Fox News, and MSNBC, and radio programs throughout the country and actually internationally. He's been awarded honorary doctorates from Benedictine College, from Holy Apostles College and Seminary. the Lumen Vitae Award from University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota, and the Catholic Culture Award from Our Lady Seat of Wisdom College. He's also served as an adjunct professor. If you know Patrick, he rarely sleeps. He'll send you a message at about 3 a.m. on Teams because he's studying or preparing for his next earned degree. So when you talk about the life cycle of continuous Catholic learner, we couldn't have anybody else as a better example of that than Patrick Riley. So if you would, Patrick, come on up.
Of course, I missed my homework for this week, and my professor wants to know what's wrong with me. I can't remember what event it was I was attending, and I can't remember who it was I was speaking to. I've been racking my brain trying to remember it, but I distinctly remember someone scoffing at the idea of having more than one keynote speaker. I said, how can you possibly have more than one keynote? The keynote should be one note. And so I think perhaps we could say variations on a theme, right? And you'll see that in my talk. It's just amazing how, when you're talking about the faith, it all comes back to the one place. That's the whole idea, right? And so thank you very much for Dr. Kilpatrick and Kelsey for your wonderful talks. That was wonderful, beautiful. So I have the task of talking to you about St. John Henry Newman. Recently named Doctor of the Church and Patron of Catholic Education. And I want to start with one word, which is not Newmanian, of course. It uses many words. Integrity. Integrity. It's a word that's rich with meaning and with implication. Integrity is derived from the Latin word integer, which literally means untouched. But it has the connotation of intact or whole. And most often today, Dr. Kilpatrick, we use the word integer in math or in science, right? And as you experts can correct me, but if I recall correctly, it means a whole number, right? But if I draw in my philosophy courses, the idea of a whole number depends on the concept of one, which is so much more than a number. Integer suggests identity. To know something is to know it as one. Integer suggests individuality. A substance can be distinct from another substance. Integer suggests wholeness, a substance that is composed of many things but is one. And even a living substance composed of body and soul can exist as one whole. And so integer is a concept that is foundational to our existence and to our experience of reality, and it's also a concept that's foundational to our Christian faith. The mystery of the Trinity requires a notion of integrity. God is integer, God is one. And integrity is of God. Okay, so thank you. You've been patient with my little detour. My topic is St. John Henry Newman, patron of Catholic education. But my thesis is that the single word integrity conveys much of who St. John Henry Newman was, how he viewed knowledge, how he understood Catholic education, and how he understood the very mission of his life. And integrity is also key to the reform of Catholic education. And this is why Newman is such an important example and an intercessor for that reform. Because integrity is what has been lacking in too much of Catholic education over the last 6 decades. And integrity is what exemplifies faithful Newman Guide recommended education. And integrity is what parents want and demand of Catholic education. So, in the early 19th century, St. John Henry Newman came to Oxford University an evangelical. He distinguished himself as an Anglican minister and left Oxford a soon-to-be Catholic. After entering the Catholic Church in 1845, Newman was ordained a priest and established the oratories of St. Philip Neri in Birmingham and London. He failed to establish the university that he envisioned in Dublin, but he still left us his visionary plan in his book, Idea of a University. And he spent much of his remaining time leading the innovative oratory school for boys. He was declared a cardinal near the end of his life by Pope Leo XIII, the same pope who declared St. Thomas Aquinas the patron of Catholic education. And now Pope Leo XIV has declared Newman a doctor of the Church and co-patron of Catholic education. So over the course of his lifetime, St. John Henry Newman was many, many things, and he could have been named patron of so many different things. He was a reformer of the Anglican Church as a leader of the Oxford movement, a preacher who attracted many students to his sermons. He was a convert cut off from his Protestant friends and his family and distrusted by the Catholics whom he had joined. He was an astute theologian who rejected that label. He was an oratory priest devoted to his parish and the poor, and a cardinal of the Church. And so with all of these things, where's the integrity in all of this, right? He was so many different things. And I see Newman's integrity as an educator. Newman's integrity, the thread that runs through his life, is found in his devotion to education. His motto as a cardinal, cor ad cor loquitur, heart speaks to heart, was also his mode even in his early years at Oxford. He believes strongly that personal influence is the best means of teaching, and that all education should be pastoral, concerned for the good of the entire soul and not just the intellect. So if Newman's integrity as an educator, his personal integrity, was apparent throughout his life, so was his devotion to the integrity of knowledge. He understood clearly that all branches of knowledge, all sciences, are man's way of organizing what he cannot possibly understand in its entirety. And that's because the fount of all knowledge is in the mind of God, the Creator. And all things are from him, and all things converge back to him. Newman understood the university then as a place of universal knowledge, a principled place where many branches of knowledge could be studied in relation to each other, with the recognition that every branch has some bearing on the other, and nothing is truly separate. Theology, especially the study of God and his divine revelation, necessarily enters into every other branch of knowledge. It's foundational to every science because it's the study of the fount of every science. The university that excludes theology excludes the most important branch of knowledge and has lost its integrity as a university. And this is true, of course, of every other level of education, not just the university. And so I think many of you would be familiar with these arguments from Newman, and these basically lead into Newman's first argument for Catholic education. Unfortunately, many people stop reading Newman at this point, and there's so much more to his argument. He argued that an education that is not Catholic is not a true or complete education, an education with integrity. And that's because catechesis and theology are not only an important branch of knowledge, but that they require protection from the other sciences, which tend to encroach upon theology, which tend to reduce it to a private matter. So Catholic education needs the Church to defend her teachings and to ensure fidelity. Also, he argued, if education is focused only or primarily on cultivating the intellect, which in its essence is the basis of education, and does not form the other faculties of the soul, the passions, and the will, which require moral training and virtue, then both the student and the teacher become distorted and possibly even dangerous to the church. And finally, he argued, the perfection of virtue and the perfection of reason are only possible with the grace of God, available to both student and teacher in prayer and through the sacraments. And without that grace, it's going to be a lesser institution. Education, therefore, he argued, needs the church. And secular education, said Newman, quote, cannot be what it professes if there be a God. Another quote, he said, I want a laity not arrogant, not rash in speech, not disputatious, but men who know their religion, who enter into it, who know just where they stand, who know what they hold and what they do not, who know their creed so well that they can give an account of it, who know so much of history that they can defend it, unquote. So here John Henry Newman leads into his next point about integrity. We've talked about his personal integrity and the integrity of the university. He believed that the church's purpose for setting up Catholic education is to restore the integrity of the soul of the student. Education, he said, should have no end outside of itself. The cultivation of reason, or what he called the philosophical habit of mind, is good in itself and should not be subjected to practical purposes, such as preparing for a career. And yet, Catholic education done well does prepare people for a career, and often much better than the common secular education. And so similarly, he believed that a truly faithful Catholic education, even done for itself, for its own value, repairs the soul of the student. And so from the church's perspective, it provides a vital service. He said that the typical student would come to his classroom with the soul disintegrated by sin. Each of the faculties of the soul, the intellect, the will, the conscience, passion, appetite, can be found in the student warring in their breast, he said, each trying to get possession of him, like demons at war with each other. And what the student knows is good is not always what he desires, right? And when he desires the good, he often chooses the bad anyhow. All of it is in conflict. And this is not how God created man to be, Newman said. He said that in the beginning, by grace, God blended together all of our human faculties so that they acted in common toward one end: the will, the passions, the conscience, the intellect. And he said a faithful Catholic education can achieve this again by cultivating the intellect together with cultivating virtue and forming conscience, and doing it all in a state of grace provided by prayer and the sacraments. And so, thus, the church's objective for education, he said, is, quote, to reunite things which were in the beginning joined by God and have been put asunder by man, unquote. I just love that characterization of Catholic education. You're restoring the integrity of the soul. Now, St. John Henry Newman himself was unable to achieve this education in his Dublin University, as he was thwarted by the competing visions of the Irish bishops and other factions. The reality that you all have to work with every day, right? He was much more successful in his oratory school in Birmingham. This is something that John Henry Newman is often referred to as the as in terms of Catholic education, in terms of the university, because of his idea of a university. But he actually spent far more time, far more effort in his life working in elementary and secondary education through the oratory school. And there's some really good work coming out on that. In fact, there's a book coming out by Paul Shrimpton, I believe, by Catholic University Press, very soon. Yes, Alex, yes, and through a Deodatus, right? He's working. Good, yeah, so I know it's coming soon, and I'm very excited. Paul Shrimpton is the foremost expert on Newman in education, I would say. And so today, Newman's vision, I would argue, is carried forward by the institutions that are recommended in the Newman Guide. It's what we're looking for. Exemplars of Newman's own integrity and his concern for the integrity of his students. Many have tried to pigeonhole Newman into an advocate for liberal education. They cherry pick a few of his discourses in his idea of a university, ignoring that these are part of his larger argument for Catholic education. And so I'm not saying that he wasn't an advocate for liberal education. He very much was, and very strongly advocated for it. But he also believed that a secular liberal education was a danger to the church and to the student for the reasons I mentioned, forming students in intellect, but with a stunted conscience and the turmoil of conflicting will and passions. This is what Pope Benedict XVI described when he declared an educational emergency the same year that we released the Newman Guide, 2007, leaving young people without knowledge of God and without integrity. And as long as I'm speaking of liberal education, let me add one final point about Newman and integrity. When he was named a cardinal and delivered his Big Lieto speech, St. John Henry Newman said that his entire life had been dedicated to dispelling the notion of liberalism in religion. And he defined this as the idea that religion is a matter of private judgment, not to interfere with one's education, one's business, or one's politics. And as America today is celebrating our 250th anniversary of liberty, we see our nation falling into radical secularism and even hatred for our Catholic faith, in part because of this notion of liberal religion. And to Newman, this was just another disguise for infidelity. The integrity of Catholics, indeed the integrity of our nation and of human society, depends on citizenship in the kingdom of God as well as our American citizenship. This has a higher law and a supreme lawgiver who in mercy and grace leads us to the true city of God that the Pilgrims thought they could establish here. Newman prayed for his students, quote, "May I engage in them remembering the worth of souls, and that I shall have to answer for the opportunities given me of benefiting those who are under my care." His own integrity demanded that he seek the integrity of his students, that they might be whole, that they might be one with God. And that is the sort of faithful formation that is so urgently needed today by Catholic parents. That is the sort of faithful formation that is embraced by Newman Guide recommended education, and by Newman's intercession may it continue to increase across the United States and the world. St. John Henry Cardinal Newman, pray for us. Thank you.
Finally caught up to the schedule. We're ahead of the schedule. So we have just a few minutes, and what we can do is make our way down. Who would like to lead us down? Who can we appoint a leader of the herd? There we go, because you're familiar with it, right? Anthony, stand up. There's our leader, okay? We're going to follow him down to where our Star Spangled Banner tonight we're going to have a dinner. We're going to have some drinks, a chance to get together with each other and just enjoy each other's company, and to celebrate not only the anniversary of the Newman Guide in 20 years, but our 250th anniversary of our nation. So let's make our way down there and have a good time together.